In recent weeks, Russia has adjusted its military strategy in Ukraine, particularly following Ukraine's incursion into the Kursk region. This shift has involved intensified military operations, including drone attacks on Kyiv. Russia is seeking to consolidate its territorial gains and prepare for potential geopolitical changes, particularly in light of the upcoming US elections. Following Ukraine's incursion into Kursk, which was perceived as a significant challenge to Russia's territorial integrity, Moscow has responded with a series of sustained and aggressive military actions. Russian forces have ramped up their operations in eastern Ukraine, particularly around the strategically important city of Pokrovsk. This area has seen intense combat in recent weeks. Russian troops have been making significant advances, capturing key settlements and employing heavy artillery as well as aerial bombardments. The Russian military has also intensified its drone warfare. It has launched repeated attacks on Ukrainian cities, including the capital Kyiv. These drone strikes are not only aimed at military targets, but also civilian infrastructure. It has caused widespread fear and disruption in Ukraine. The Ukrainian Air Force has responded, in some instances successfully intercepting a significant number of these drones, but the sheer volume of these attacks have put a strain on Ukraine's defenses. As Kyiv has been racing its reinforcements to eastern Ukraine to try and stabilize its defensive lines there, President Vladimir Putin of Russia has amplified his threats against the region. He has called Moscow's offensive in the area as the first priority goal for Russia's military. Putin, speaking at an international conference in Vladivostok last week, sought to portray his army's grueling advance in eastern Donbass as an evidence of a failed Ukrainian military strategy. He largely dismissed Ukraine's capture of hundreds of square miles of Russian territory in Kursk as a little more than a distraction. Kyiv made a mistake, he said, in deploying fairly large and well-trained units to the Kursk offensive. Analysts have said that diverting Russian troops was perhaps not the only goal of Ukraine's incursion, but it also provided a morale booster as well as created a buffer zone which Ukraine might leverage in future ceasefire negotiations. It also punctured the notion that Russia was immune from troops invading and capturing its territory. Now, the other big geopolitical factor which is at play is the potential presidency of Kamala Harris. This could significantly impact US-Russia relations and impact even the responses of both parties to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Harris's approach to foreign policy, particularly vis-à-vis Russia, will likely be different from that of President Biden. Kamala Harris has demonstrated a commitment to supporting Ukraine in its conflict against Russia. If elected, she may prioritize a robust response to Russia's aggression. She could also continue and possibly even intensify military and economic support for Ukraine. This could include additional sanctions on Russia, increased military aid to Ukraine. Such measures would aim to deter further Russia's advances and also signal to Moscow that America means business. Putin's recent remarks, which seem to endorse Harris, suggest a bit of a complex interplay between what is reality and what is perception. He praised Harris's infectious laugh. He also implied that her success in the campaign might lead to a more lenient approach towards Russia. By doing so, what he wanted to do is to contrast her potential presidency with tougher sanctions that were imposed when Trump was president. However, this endorsement may have been a bit of a sarcastic jab, if you will, more than a genuine expression of support. If Harris adopts a more aggressive stand towards Russia, it could force Putin to reassess his military strategy in Ukraine. A more hawkish Harris might compel Russia to reconsider its current tactics. That could potentially lead to a recalibration of its military objectives. It could manifest either as an escalation of hostilities or a strategic withdrawal, depending on how Putin perceives the risks of a more aggressive White House. Already, Joe Biden's administration has already implemented significant sanctions against Russia. The total military spend on Ukraine by America in the last 4 years has exceeded $60 billion. However, Harris may push for a more unified NATO response. She could also explore new avenues for military assistance which could further heighten tensions with Moscow. Her leadership style, which is characterized by a willingness to engage directly, might lead to more provocations. Russia's military strategy appears to be focused on securing as much territory as possible before the US elections in November 2024. Now, analysts also suggest that President Putin aims to create a fait accompli which would complicate any future negotiations with the West. By consolidating his position on the ground, Putin is seeking to enhance Russia's leverage in any potential diplomatic discussion, and particularly one that were to happen post the election if the US political landscape shifts. The upcoming US elections are a significant factor influencing Russia's strategy. The prospect of a Kamala Harris presidency, should she succeed Joe Biden, raises concerns for Moscow. Harris has been vocal about her support for Ukraine. She's advocated a more robust response. Putin's calculations seem to hinge on the notion that a more favorable outcome for Russia could be achieved if he can secure territorial gains before the US elections. The Kremlin likely believes that a change in US leadership should lead to a shift in American foreign policy. Putin's historical behavior suggests he may adapt his strategies based on the perceived threats from US leadership. If Harris is seen as more hawkish, then he might respond with increased military posturing or further attempts to destabilize Ukraine. And what if it's Donald Trump who becomes president again? What would that mean for Putin and the Ukraine war? Trump himself has routinely avoided criticizing the Russian president. Trump responded to Putin's recent comments favoring Kamala Harris by saying, and I quote, "Now Putin is backing Kamala Harris. Frankly, I was offended by that. Why would he support her? Putin is a strategic thinker, but I should be concerned about this. Was this a sarcastic move? I can't say for sure," unquote. While the US media picked up on Trump saying that he was offended, the more important line is perhaps that Putin is a strategic thinker. Trump has several times said that he has a plan for ending the Russia-Ukraine war. He has called it a surprise and therefore is not revealing to anybody. And there is some apprehension in Kyiv about a Trump presidency. Signals from Trump's close aides indicate that he might seek to pressure Kyiv towards ceding territory as well as other concessions which would eventually lead to peace. Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, has been more vocal about stopping aid to Ukraine. And long before Ukraine launched its Kursk operation last month, the Russians were already making significant progress in the direction of Pokrovsk, which is a vital logistics hub. After more than 6 months of brutal battles, Russian forces have been able to create a large bulge which extends about 20 miles deep through the center of Ukraine's defenses. To the north of that bulge, the Ukrainians are still managing to thwart Russia into Chasiv Yar, which is another Ukrainian stronghold. There's been bloody urban fighting in another nearby stronghold, Kursk. That's also slowed down Russian advances. To the south, the Russians are stepping up assaults in the direction of Kharkov and Voldar, two towns that played a critical role in the overall defense of Donbass. If these strongholds were to fall, it could lead to a wider breakdown of Ukraine's defenses. That's why Vladimir Zelensky has said that he's hoping that the Kursk offensive would ease pressure on the Eastern Front. But the success of that strategy is yet unclear.